Hi guys, so it's me again coming to you from the village of Tabaquite where I have been observing a lot of tremors. In a report posted on the internet about 2 weeks ago, I observed where someone from the seismic unit at UE was indicating that the Piparo mud volcano have been active. As of January 2025, they've been monitoring it and making posts. I live about a half hour away from the Piparo mud volcano, and from the distance at times you can actually feel tremors rumbling of the earth's surface. Since then to now, I have been observing patterns around, and one of the things that strike me is the stones or the rocks that have been coming down the river. Where I am at now, the Ministry of Works has fixed the bridge. It was a wooden bridge structure and they fixed it. So they drenched the river and it was literally emptied of all stones and debris. Since the rainy season has started about a week ago, I have noticed prior to that small chunks of stones coming down the river, but more so recently with the rains. What I'm about to show you looks as though there are great parts of a ruin, perhaps a wall, a pyramid structure. It could be Mayan, it could be Aztecs, it could be Egyptian Incas influenced, alright, or an amalgamation of various tribes or peoples. It could even have English influence because some of these things have been rumored to have been renovated by Englishmen when they visited and found these ruins empty. Also, there were rumors of Bantu people coming into the country and being allowed to live in these parts in such conditions. So, what I'm about to show you is the actual proof. If anybody could, just by looking at it, be able to tell what type of material and whom it's associated with, it's much appreciated. You can put your comments below. So as you can see, I'm zooming in, these chunks of rocks were literally swept down in the river with the rains. The size of it, it's heavy, so the water would have been very powerful to bring them down this way. These were not here before, and within the last week or so, I've observed the changes. They have been washed down. What is across there seems to be fossils of some nature. That white piece there and that piece there seems to be fossils. And as you can see, there seems to be like a snake head. Perhaps this piece right there with a stone on top of its back, it seems to be like the shape or carving of a snake head going all the way down to the neck right there before being cut off. It's very smooth, so if it's not naturally made, then it's literally a carving of some structure that was once here and got buried or something. Let me take you across the bridge that the ministry recently constructed. Thank you for that, because cars couldn't pass at times, definitely not trucks, because of the heaviness. It could have gone down the wooden bridge, so we thank you for that, by the way. So on this side of the bridge, you can see much more larger chunks of rocks, and it was drenched, totally empty. So these things have been coming down the river recently. The rocks, they seem to be having an amalgamation of sorts. That brown one, for example, it seems to be made of one type of material. Likewise, the chunk there, one type of material carved out or perhaps broken off. However, the piece here seems to have a mixture, as you would mix clay with straws or various materials to get a combination. You can actually see within the rocks smaller pieces or chunks as though it was mortared in together. Alright, so what we're looking at here could possibly literally be natural formations, and someone took their time and they actually put man-made material together with natural formations, all right, of the structure of the land perhaps, to get a beautiful structure. Now the river flows towards this direction, and as you can see, the water is flowing that way. So whatever debris, whatever is coming down, it's coming down from the mountains. And as you can tell, the mountains, it's where Amerindian people love to set up. You see, Amerindian people loved mountainous areas. They loved flora, fauna, and they dwell among the canopies and whatnot. There are those found along the coastlines who traded and whatnot, but for survival, they decided to come inland. It was more safe to move away from the coastlines and to come inland, especially with the coming of the Europeans. It was much safer, absolutely much safer, to come inland at that time, notwithstanding the adverse weathers and tribal attacks, because there were different tribes within the area. Where this location is, it's literally about 5 minutes away from the Santa Rita Quarry and the Batchasing Quarry, which are known to have found Amerindian artifacts when they excavated, and Devonish Hill, another 5 minutes away, which is known to have had stories of Amerindian people dwelling there. All right, so this aspect to where there is, it's a much more dense area, still very much forested. So I believe the canopy that has been barely touched is literally hiding a lot of beautiful historical data, historical sites, wonderful architect that lovers of history and lovers of the Amerindian people and their cultures and contributions to our development as a society as it is today would love to research and appreciate and value for its contributing factor to tourism and heritage and all of these wonderful things, provided that there are not untouched Amerindians living there still. Because I have seen people that were dressed in garb made out of leaves, and they were behaving and speaking in a foreign language, which I presume is a native Amerindian language. Okay, so I deduce that there are people still untouched by society living in these parts. Perhaps when they see people coming, they go further inland and away from their dwellings to be able to live on their own. Now, the Amerindian people are known to be very passive people, very quiet, and they can mimic animal songs very well. So sometimes if people go hiking and they hear animal songs, they may think it's an animal, a wild animal, whatever, and go off or pass by them and they're unnoticed. The truth is, they're very, very good at mimicking animal songs, and they're very good at hiding in the bushes, in forested areas. Very, very good at it. They're very swift, very silent. When they run through the bushes, you don't really hear footsteps. You don't hear much because nature protects. So you don't hear them often. They can pass by very silently and no one can tell. As for their smell, I must be honest with you, I've never gotten a smell from them per se. I've gotten the smell of animals because of the pelt. But from the natural person, the ones I've had contact with, they bathe. Okay? They bathe, they cook, they do everything as humans do. So I didn't get a smell from them. Now, the Amerindian people were very good at using herbs. My grandfather, Maximo Acosta, well, step grandfather, Maximo Acosta, had been teaching me as a child of using herbs because there once was an incident where people were injecting children in the health centers in my era with poison and the children were dying. They were trying to kill off some people so they wouldn't have to pay much money for them so that money could go towards other people. It was such a horrific time growing up as a child, hearing my mother stating that I needed my shots, and she was petrified. She was so frightened that people might do that to me, because she was also threatened that one day someone passed and said, and she need a shot? And it felt as a threat more than a warning, concerned person, advocating getting vaccinations. So my grandfather, being who he was at the time, taught me some of the herbs because he came from the Warahun tribe in the Point Fortin area, down Ikakas side. That's where his family originated from, and they traveled throughout Trinidad and started buying lands and setting up their families in different parts of Trinidad, marrying and whatnot. But initially his bloodline came from setting up in Point Fortin, Point-a-Pierre, Ikakas area, South Trinidad. He told me that his ancestors came from Venezuela. His great-grandmother came from Venezuela, and she was part of the Warahun tribe. When I searched the map, it adds up that they crossed the Orinoco River and entered into Trinidad and was living in the southern part of Trinidad when he was born. All right? So I searched when I was going at the University of Trinidad and Tobago. I searched some of the things he was telling me through an oral tradition, oral interview, and the information he gave me off the top of his head, based on memory as a child and stories told to him by his ancestors. When I go to the map and I search it up to today, literally it checks. The information is sound. Alright, so his Spanish roots, while the original set came from Spain, they set up in Venezuela, and from Venezuela they came to Trinidad. So that's my step-grandfather's Amerindian and Spanish history, which made him a mestizo. A mestizo is a Spanish blend with an Amerindian. So the mestizo people, given their Amerindian heritage, would have been allowed to go into the jungles and would have gotten a bit of protection and leniency because of their mother or father, who was the Amerindians' lineage, giving them leniency. So they would have been protected somewhat. They would have been allowed to go to certain places, but not too far off, depending on the level at which the Amerindian was within the Amerindian social structure, political structure, and economic structures. All right? In such a case, the mestizos were able to climb up the social ladder within the territories, given that they had their Spanish ancestral appearance, protection, as well as the Amerindian people's appearance in some regards and protection. Even if they did not have their physical appearance, they would have had their love for nature, the respect of the animals and that sort of thing. So the Mestizo people have been growing in the country quietly, and the Mestizos were the ones who climbed and were just below the Spanish in terms of their political, social, and economic structure, place in the systems that existed prior colonialism as we know it. All right? That's before the English coming. What we know today is heavily based on the English influence. What I'm telling you is heavily based on the Spanish influence. So one of the things that might have been were forts. Another possibility of those things coming down could have been a Mestizo's concept, influenced by his father or mother's upbringing, to build with concrete because it's stronger. All right. Um, but at the same time, you can sense something about it is Amerindian. You could strongly sense it. All right. So I deduce it could possibly be, if not pure Amerindian construction, it could possibly be a Mestizo's influence. All right, which would explain why some of the stones were mixed, because in Spain, when you look at their blocks and their bricks, it's mixed. All right, whereas in the Caribbean and Americas, they chisel out stones and they shape it and they put it. It depends again on where you are. Some people make blocks, some people chisel out blocks. It depends. All right, because I've been researching various architectural designs and methods, and they're all similar but very different all the same. And I'm not obsessed per se. I really am not obsessed per se, but something about this place intrigues me because I was told it was an Amerindian ancestral burial ground. I was told also that they used to have sacrifices literally across the bridge from here in that open field. It's still literally open, right? They would have cows, white cows, and they would sacrifice them literally on the field there. All right. Also, there's a cocoa estate, a lot of cocoa crops on the other side, going all the way for some acres. All right, acres of cocoa land with cocoa still on it. And for those of you who know of the Aztecs traded using cocoa seeds as money. The currency was actually cocoa beans. When the Spanish came, they planted the first cocoa, Criollo cocoa variety in Trinidad when the Spanish came. All right. So if it was mestizos traveling through South America and coming up into the Caribbean area, it might have been some Aztecs or Mayan travelers, plumes, if you will, for the Mayans, coming in these spots and trading cocoa beans for whatever Trinidad had to offer in those times. Or I should say Venezuela, because also Trinidad was once connected to Venezuela. So if you are looking at this, you have to look at the time period in which Trinidad broke away from via an earthquake and whatnot. Now, the next thing about it is some of these rocks, based on how it's crystallized, you can tell there was volcanic activities that covered a lot of animals, trees, whatnot. There are literal, if you look and show you, it's better to show you. If you look on the bank of the river, all those little stones there, they're literally rocks that were crystallized. Some of it, as the excavator had widened the river, you could have actually spotted rocks that had engravings such as tree trunks. I went very close and I touched some, and you could actually feel the ridges of a tree bark, such as those trees there. You see how the trunk is rigid? Right. But it's made of stone instead. So picture lava flowing and covering up these trees, and they're becoming crystallized. And over the years, they have been a part of the rock formations. That is what has happened. So it's very interesting. I mean, maybe it's perhaps my love for geography and nature. I don't know if I'm reading too much into this, because I'm not an expert geologist. I'm literally just someone who studied basic geography at UTT and at the Tabaquite Secondary School. Very basic geography, so I can't tell you much, but I can tell you that the evidence speaks for itself. That's all I can say. All right? And that includes typography, because what I was told in these parts by a teacher some time ago in primary school who owns some of the land, is that when he had just came here as a boy, on one of the trees he saw some red markings. There were lines and dots. He said he was just a boy and didn't understand the value of it or what it meant. They dismissed it like it was obia. Don't touch it, is what he was told as a boy. Don't go near it, don't touch it, don't leave that so. And the first chance the family got, they cut down the tree and threw it away. He said, but when he started teacher's training college, he learned of the Amerindian people and he saw the markings and he remembered it as a boy. So he realized those trees were actually markings of perhaps of the cocos that was brought in or sold, which brings us to the topography of the Mayan people, which in those days were called glyphs. All right, lines with dots. Each dot represented 1, the line 5, and you continue, very similar to Roman numerals. All right, very similar to Roman numerals. So that's probably why I'm intrigued about the place too, because when I was in his class, I was just about 5 years old, and they were looking for people who were sensible enough to do historical research. In our society, they choose you from young and push you to study in an area, if you're capable of it. And he stated that it's such a shame they wanted me to marry, but I had what it took because I believed. And when I read the stories of the Amerindians, I did not disrespect them. I very much appreciated their contribution to our society. When I read about Sir Walter Raleigh and the hummingbirds and the Amerindians that were gobbled up by the pitch lake, I found that to be very disturbing. When I read about the Kiskadee and the Amerindians and whatnot, it's very interesting. And what I found out recently is that the Africans, Tainos, and Spanish ethnic blends was called a name very similar to Kiskadee. Now the Kiskadee bird, I was asked by the teacher, do you know what it means? And I said no. And someone visited the school and they asked, do you want to know what it means? And I said yes, because I was troubled. I wanted to know, what does Kiskadee mean? And the teacher with glasses, I believe his name was Mr. Anthony, he said, one day you will find out. And that's what it meant. They actually named the bird Kiskadee, which is symbolic of the mixing of the races with the Africans, Tainos people and the Spanish people, which sounds very similar to the word Kiskadee. All right? And I didn't know that. That was interesting. And my teachers did tell me, you will know, because I wanted to know, what does Kiskadee mean? And I looked at the K, and I kept playing with the K in the word Kiskadee and wanted to know, what does Kiskadee mean? Kiskadee. Anyhow, because I was learning my Spanish from my mother's book as well, and Q-U-E always would strike me because she would say K. And I would say, oh, K. Mommy, but Q-U-E means K, and how come, why didn't they just put one letter, K? And she said, that's Spanish, and that's how the Spanish do their things. Now, come on. Right? So I was just in second year, and I was looking at K and wondering, K, why didn't they put a Q, U-E, K? And that's probably what strikes someone to come look for this 5-year-old child, this 6-year-old child who was intrigued by the word Kiskadee, not knowing its meaning. Perhaps being part Amerindian, African, Chinese, all kind of races, Spanish as well. Right? My bloodline is traced back to Spain. Parts of me, the spirits, the ancestral spirits that dwell within or around, perhaps was guiding. All right? And that's why I became so inquisitive. Perhaps part of me can hear their world or their side. And very little is known of the Amerindian in our country. Very little is known of their practices because it was considered pagan. And I tell you this, do not mess with them. Their gods control nature. Their gods control the animals. Their gods are the animals and nature. And when you go dabbling with something you do not know about, you can cause chaos and imbalances. So one of the things I had been promised as a child to do was not go interfering without permission and following certain rules, principles. I had to be invited in, and I had to be invited in. You have to prove yourself to them. They're not going to just open up their doors to you and say, "Hi, come in, little girl." No, your family have to have been working and helping and proving themselves for quite some years. I'm not joking about this. Years before they open up their doors to you, because given the nature of what happened to the Amerindian people, they don't trust people very much, especially the white man. And that's not a joke. All right. One of the things that I've been accused of by some natives is that I was used to infiltrate who they are, to change who they were. I wasn't infiltrating them to change who they were, but I did influence them to go to school and get jobs and, to be regularized, so to speak, which for their ancestral string would have been a bit insulting because they dwell on nature and being a part of the land and all of that. So I pulled them away from their heritage. And if that was meant to be an insult, I apologize. It was never my intention. It was just my intention to have people become a bit modernized within their society to fit into bigger pictures, and get things done. But again, in our culture, I could understand why they were upset, because now when you're in a different realm, a different level, you're seen more. One of the things the Amerindian people do away from society is hunt. They still hunt and gather. And you see, there's a hunting law in our country where you can only hunt for 6 months of the year. And not 6 months, sorry, 3 months of the year. A quarterly they give you. And the other 3/4 you don't get to hunt. Now the Amerindian people dwell on the land and they dwell on the wild animals. When those laws are put in place, they can't feed themselves. They can't feed their families. And when you move them away from that and you put them in a modern society, what measures are there to sustain them if they dwell on this type of, system? Not to mention, they're not educated in English, but they may have skills. What skills would a modern society need that has machines? AI, if you will. All right? And if you dwell on ancestral spirits or whatnot, for the Christian, it would be regarded as obia or witchcraft. Because the ancestral spirits in nature, the animals, whatever, doing the task or along with you, you would be considered pagan or dabbling with witchcraft. When someone is converted to Christianity or a part of a modern world or within Christianity, and they have to dwell on their ancestral spirits, they can't bring their ancestral spirits in those forms with them. That's trouble. Which could perhaps explain why so many floodings. Because they can come in the elements. Earth, wind, fire, water. Right? So that's a serious thing. Global warming started in 1995, 6 thereabout. Was it that someone blended with the races and a lot of beautiful children were created in another realm and the spirits couldn't reach out, so they came in the form of the elements to see them? And that's why there are so many hot weathers and, storms and snowstorms and all these different floods and all of that. Perhaps. And you see, for the Amerindian people to have lived in such conditions for so many years and survive, they would have been with spirits, Spirits would have been with them. The Lord Spirit, which is perhaps why they were sent to be Christianized. Who's to say? So, with that being said, I'm cutting off a half hour, and put your comments. Let's get this site going so that people could become aware, and let's appreciate the little left. Bye.